T minus 40 seconds. T minus 30 seconds. T minus 20 seconds. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Own it, own it, own it, Kong. I own it. It did.
Women's Wrestling Talk, the #1 women's wrestling show on the planet. Women's Wrestling Talk, the #1 women's wrestling show on the planet.
Well, happy Monday, family. TGIM, I guess. Well, nobody really is grateful that it's Monday, but I am, because Monday means we get to come together for WWT Live on Women's Wrestling Talk, the #1 women's wrestling show on the planet. My name is Gerard Bonner. They call me the professor around these parts, and I am not alone. Yes, I am filling in for our girl, the boss lady, TK Trinidad, who has 5 million jobs, and she's tending to some other business. But no worries, we can hold down the fort while she is taking care of things. And of course, I'm not alone. I've got the good brother Cedric is with us. Cedric, how are you, man?
I'm great, man. And yeah, I don't think too many people say TGIM, but what can you do about that? You know, it's Monday. We might as well embrace it.
Because it's not going to stop being Monday until it's not Monday anymore. So
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. How was your weekend, man?
It was solid, man. Relaxing, a little bit of fun. Hit trampoline park, got me a deep tissue massage. It was great. Great. I needed that reset.
That is a very strong self-care weekend. The trampoline park, which is the
which humbled me. I'm not gonna front. It humbled me. You know. I think everybody over 30 should visit the trampoline park to see if they're really about that life, because I'm not.
It'll remind you quickly. It'll remind you very, very quickly. That's for sure. And then the deep tissue massage. Yeah, that is absolutely the way to go.
That was the result.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially after the trampoline park. Absolutely. We spent the day yesterday visiting Thomas the Train with my 3-year-old. And he loved that, his first time on the train. And
it was a surprise, right? You mentioned it was going to be a surprise.
Yeah, it was a surprise. He loved it. Nice. He absolutely loved it. So he had a great time. Did some miniature golfing as well. So that was fun, kind of teaching him the way in that. So yeah, it was a fun time. Fun time. Shout out to the folks joining us in the chat already. Cool Gamer, what's going on? My man, Ron. Good to see you, good brother. And obviously, feel free to share what we've got going on here, because there's a lot. And I do mean a lot to discuss. So, Ced, what would you like to start the show off with? Because a whole lot has happened in the last 72 hours.
You know what? We had the draft, we had everything, but let's start with some good news before we go down a rabbit hole. Congratulations to Carmella and Corey Graves, who announced that they are expecting a child later this year. They announced that this year, and I love the tagline, Mella is mommy, which beautiful. Yes. Hopefully I print some shirts of that, but congratulations to those two. We've known that Carmella's been off TV for some time. At first, we thought it was kind of a little bit of an injury that was going on, or maybe some health issues. Then it came out that they were trying to conceive, and the announcement made this morning. So clap it up. Congratulations to those two. Wish them a beautiful family.
Absolutely. Big congratulations to them. And knowing the trouble that she had gone through in terms of pregnancy, you know, the issue that she had in terms of losing the baby last year, and she went public about that, which is why she was off of TV then. And, it's so interesting how things happen because, you remember that she was supposed to be in a qualifying tag team match for the tag team showcase on
Right.
WrestleMania. And when she was suddenly pulled off, people started having all kinds of questions. And, the internet wrestling community can be really, really funny because when she showed
Yeah,
up with
yeah.
Corey Graves to do the unveiling of the stage of WrestleMania, they were like, oh, so she can do this, but she's not wrestling. Like, what's going on? Well, now we understand she's
There you
pregnant.
go. Just took a
And
little bit of patience.
that's all. It'll all be revealed in time. So congratulations to Carmella and Corey. And I really wish them nothing but the absolute best. Hey, Boza, good to see you. He said it's interesting to read that she went on to Good Morning America of all shows to tell us the great news. Well, I'm not mad at that. That's a mainstream space, and to be able to share that news, I think is pretty awesome.
And
And
it also boosts their brand. They have the podcast together. This is also boosting for their personal brand outside of the
absolutely,
WWE.
yeah. So they win all the way around in this, and I'm very, very happy and excited for them. Again, congratulations to Corey and Carmella. All right, where else shall we go, kind sir?
You know what? I still don't want to talk about the bad news. Because we're gonna have to get into it. Because there was something that was circling in the internet wrestling
Oh
community over
yes,
the weekend. That was a very big talking point. But
yes.
we're gonna talk about good news first.
Let's go.
Nikki Cross, who's
Oh
not been on
yes.
TV for a while, she actually came on Twitter with some good news, saying that she has turned in her dissertation for her master's, thanking people who helped her on the way, and maybe a PhD is in the future. So salute to Nikki Cross. Congratulations to everybody who's been in college, who's done some graduate type of education as well, knows how time consuming and demanding it is, what type of effort and commitment it takes. So congrats to her. Obviously, a very far important reason to be off of WWE programming in this time of absence, but that's just awesome news, man. So I'd rather keep the vibes high while we still can,
While we
and
can.
salute Nikki Cross in this moment.
We definitely salute Nikki Cross. And again, it reminds me of also Xavier Woods when he was going through getting his degree while still wrestling as well. So, I love seeing wrestlers and athletes continuing to further their education. It's kind of the understanding that they are aware that this doesn't last forever. Certainly wrestlers back in the day, I mean, this was their spot and they were doing it for the rest of their lives, so that if they ended up leaving the business somehow, they were seemingly lost. So it's really, really cool to see that for today's wrestler, wrestling is a part of their lives. It's not their entire lives. And they have other aspirations. And so shout out to Nikki Cross, man. Like that's really dope. That's
Yeah,
really,
it's just a beauty. Like, you know what goes on with like backstage politics and
yeah,
booking and try to fight for your spot and get people to believe in you as a character, but just to take on another challenge that's completely different and be
yeah.
successful, it has to feel so good.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Boza says wrestlers are showing today that it's great to have a plan B. Absolutely. Deanna and Impact. And now, yeah. So continuing your education, I think, is super important, and kind of having a plan. Again, it's so interesting that nowadays wrestlers will be upfront and say, hey, I'm planning to do this X number of years, and then I'm going to do blase blah. Bianca Belair has talked about going into movies, and other people have talked about their other career aspirations, which I think is just absolutely awesome. I love that. I'm excited for them. And when we think about it, some of the biggest names that we consider, like a Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, those two, when we think about the time they spent in ring, wasn't terribly long. I
Nah,
mean,
really wasn't.
The Rock did under a decade. Like it's kind of mind-boggling when you think about that in that regard. So, not all wrestlers have to, give their entire lives to the sport to be remembered. Because of course the key is to have life after wrestling, which I think is super important. So shout out to Nikki Cross for doing what she is doing. And you know what? I actually like that we started off with this kind of news, because I think the internet community is so accustomed to the knockdown, drag out, let's have the argument fights, which I suppose that probably this isn't even on the schedule, but we didn't do this Friday. I guess this is a good place to say rest in peace to Jerry Springer, who passed away over the weekend, who at one point felt very comfortable calling himself the grandfather of garbage TV. And he obviously had great ties to the world of pro wrestling, being involved several times in WWE situations and the like. But it's interesting because his brand of television is so on brand with what people are interested in now, which is conflict, controversy, sometimes even being ratchet, which is kind of crazy. Now, we're not going to get to that story yet, but it's just a small precursor. That we're
kind of spawned reality TV. You know,
he totally did.
Think about it, spawned it. Like, and even when you see, I forget the name of the movie when I was a child, he had his own movie growing up. Like, we know that Jerry Springer, it's scripted. Like, a lot of it's scripted. They give you talking points backstage. You go out there, make a fool of yourself. You get a couple bucks type of thing. But he spawned what we see as reality TV that does have its sprinklings and inklings of like, hey, do this, and influencing others that are on the set. But he birthed that in a daily television show. And just thinking about it, like, as a child, if you had a sick day from school or you had an off day, like, you were watching Jerry Springer, like, you were tuning in.
Yeah.
And to think of the staying power of that show for years, how it spawned like the Steve Wilkos show and then others that kind of coined that type of television. Like, he birthed a lot of different blueprints.
Yeah. And he did that, the show debuted in 1990, and it did not go off the air until 2018. That's actually a scary, almost 3 full decades. So, if folks who did not live during the 90s, which there are quite a few, didn't understand what daytime TV was docile. I mean, in comparison, like, they wanted to discuss real issues, real things, which there's not a problem with. But he came and upset the apple cart in such a way where it was just like, holy cow. And you're right. He totally ushered in what we know as reality TV. So shout out there to the memory of Jerry Springer. All right. What would you like to go to next?
You know what? Let's see some
big things we haven't touched.
There are some big things you haven't touched, but one thing that that stood out to me earlier, Shane Helms, he posted on Twitter about the live crowd. If you know, WWE was recently in Paris, France, doing a WWE live tour, and Bayley actually tweeted out that let's have a PLE in Paris. Now that makes me think. Even if I compare this to football, we know the NFL has been making their push in the UK, having London games every single season. They're now going to be doing 2 games the following season. So that might even lead to a franchise team out there. And we know WWE this year in particular, with Backlash being in Puerto Rico, Money in the Bank being in the UK as well. Then they also had the Cardiff Wells show last year, which was really huge. We know that these are very raucous, rowdy crowds because the shows over there are few and far between.
Right.
I think Bayley's on to something here, as well as Shane. Just the way you can engage with the international fans. Not only will they show up, but I think here in America, we're so desensitized to live events and wrestling that crowds can be very docile and timid, and you don't get that over there. They're loud the entire time. And I think that breeds a certain type of energy for the performers in the ring. So I don't know. What would you think if they did start doing more PLEs overseas, but in Paris in general?
Well, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think one of the things that gets you an audience with the WWE is exactly how your town responds when you're in town. For instance, I remember, I think a lot of us can't ever forget the debut of Ricochet a few years ago in Lafayette, Louisiana. And that space stunk up the joint. Like, they were such a horrible crowd that, like, even WWE let them have it on the socials. And so, we haven't seen too many shows from Lafayette, Louisiana since then. So I think that the Paris crowd showing such love for WWE can certainly create a scenario where there potentially is either an episode of Raw or SmackDown or even a PLE. There's also a video floating around about Baron Corbin in Paris.
Yeah.
And that video, Baron Corbin was so legitimately moved that people were cheering for him that he almost didn't know what to do. And he won the match, which makes me wonder, like, and it was his first win, they say, all year long. So it says to me that the crowd absolutely had something to do with that, because I'm sure going into Paris, nobody said, oh, we're going to put Baron Corbin over. So
Yeah.
I think, again, the power of that crowd is massive. And you said something really powerful, how American crowds can be so desensitized because at times, we're so accustomed to just having things that we figure, oh, I don't get it this time, I'll do it the next time, or I don't have
We're
to go to that.
privileged. We don't realize how privileged we are because they go on tour every year. And now it makes me think, because musicians do this,
Mhm.
comedians do this. If you don't chant, shout, sing along with the lyrics, laugh at the jokes, you get dinged. They're not showing up in your city no more. So why don't wrestling promotions do this as well?
Yeah,
On a bigger scale.
I think it would be a smart thing to do. I really, really do. And it reminds me too, just how short of a memory span we have. Let's just remember, family, that it was 3 years ago that nobody could go to anything, right? We
Mhm.
were all trapped in our house. We were all upset about the state of pro wrestling because you couldn't have a crowd there. These wrestlers are trying to do the best they can, literally putting their lives on the line, wrestling in front of an empty arena just so that we would have some degree of entertainment. And when
Right.
we finally got back, those first few months were fire because it was just like, oh my God, I can get back out to an event. But it didn't take long for the fans to fan again, because as American fans, we are privileged. So it's interesting. It makes me think about what SummerSlam will be like, since that's going to be the next PLE in the United States. We've got, in the mainland United States, because of course you've got Backlash in Puerto Rico next week. But from there, you've got Night of Champions in Saudi at the end of May. Then you have Money in the Bank in July in London. And then it's not until August until we see a PLE back in mainland United States.
Back in Detroit, Michigan.
Yeah,
So like we could see a trend, if they have like some highs these next couple months, those events, we might like imagine if the big four are all overseas at one point.
Wow.
And that would be beautiful for our mainland fans here in America traveling overseas. It might cost you a pretty penny, but for those fans over there who aren't privy to this every year, that would be very big for them.
It would be, which is probably where I think AEW is banking on how well they'll do with Wembley, because it's AEW's first time in London. So everybody wants to be there for the first show, knowing that you don't know when the next one is coming.
So bothers me though.
Say that again.
The 80K still bothers me though. I'm still failing to see.
Firstly, I'm curious to what the production setup is going to be like. Like, I don't know that they are really preparing for 80K, because here's the deal. Because their weekly show pulls in about 5 or 6K a week, if you do 60K, that's 10 times. It's going to look, and we aren't able, after having seen, what AEW does on a weekly basis, we're not able on the naked eye to just be able to go, oh, that's 65,000. Oh, that's it. We're going to say that's a lot of people, because the Tokyo Dome for Wrestle Kingdom made 40,000 people look like 100,000 people. So I think it'll be camera angles and things like that. Now, there is a demand, but I don't know. Now, there's still a lot of question in terms of whether or not that event's going to actually be on pay-per-view, which I just can't imagine you having a stadium show for AEW and not putting it on pay-per-view. But that's a decision to be made. for later. Let's get some comments here. Boza is saying they don't get TV or pay-per-view overseas, so they are very much appreciative when WWE comes to town. I agree with Bailey. WWE needs to do TV or pay-per-view in Paris like yesterday for sure. And during that time, I appreciated WWE's talking about the pandemic more because there weren't those stupid fans that wanted TV time so bad that they tossed beach balls. Well, you're right.
I think that happens a lot too at the American shows. You get fans that you pay for your ticket and you think it gives you a right to try to hijack the show and take over the show and just chant obscenities, stuff like that. It's like, dude, there's children here. At the end of the day, because we got a lot of grown fans in pro wrestling. Like,
right.
At the end of the day, this is for the kids. Like, let the kids enjoy the show as well, and like just be a fan, support the show, support the performers. You
are right. It is that. There's an entitlement that happens, which
there's a lot that goes in wrestling shows, man.
Oh God, so much. All right, so now's probably a good time. Let's dig into this.
Into it. Are we just gonna rip the Band-Aid off?
Yeah, because we got the draft. We've still got some other big news from Impact as well. So let's. Or do you want to do the Impact news first? Which do you want to do?
Your call. I did first.
Okay, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's do the Impact news, and then let's go to the draft. Okay. So Wednesday, when we were on, we broke the news about Trinity signing to Impact, and over the weekend, she did her first TV tapings. First one being Friday with her debut. That debut will actually air this coming Thursday night on Access TV, 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central. If you don't have Access TV, if you have the Impact Plus app, you'll be able to watch the show on there. And then she also had her first match there in Chicago against Kylan King the next night. Trinity in Impact is a thing. It's a very big thing. On top of that, there are reports and photos of a disguised Mercedes Moné actually in the crowd there to watch Trinity's debut. There's also talk that CM Punk was doing his Chicago wrestling tour and found his way to Impact Wrestling over the weekend. Why, I have no idea. But yeah, man, what are your thoughts on the debut of Trinity in Impact and what this will mean for her?
I think that she has a good chance to put on a lot of great matches, show a different side of her character and personality that she didn't get to show in WWE for booking, script writing, whatever. And from some video that I've seen, finishing matches a little bit different fashion, more submissions, more using her athleticism in a different way. I just think it's a good move all around. I'm looking forward to seeing more. I think it'll make your casual fan tune into Impact to see more of the rivalries. It can only be beneficial for everybody. And
yes.
And side note, I think it's totally hilarious that, like, this, I don't know if it's an inside joke, that CM Punk is like the Jay Prince of Chicago, so you got to check in with me if your wrestling promotion is out here. I think that's funny. It's becoming a theme. It's like, oh, Impact out here, let me pull up. You got running by me when you come to my city, you know?
Right.
I think that's hilarious.
That is purely comical for sure. But yeah, I do think we're going to see a different side of Trinity. And as I'm thinking about it, you know, Trinity's move to Impact, Mercedes' move to New Japan, even Athena's move to Ring of Honor and the work that they're doing there only puts more eyes on all of those non-WWE products, which I think is good for the business as a whole. You know, it's a really, really good space. And so I'm excited because at this point, we can no longer say that it will be WWE booking that holds her down. I think she gets the opportunity to show us the things that she's always wanted to show us and didn't. So I'm intrigued to see what this run is going to look like. Totally different opponents for her, which means we're going to get totally different kinds of matches. And we're going to get to see some things from her that I don't think we had the opportunity to see. So this is such a win. And I love the support that's going on for Trinity all across the space. I mean, she is getting support from everywhere. And she just dropped this, I think we still have it, this really fire picture, which I'm just like, this is This is everything. And the quote on there is about family, and the importance of family. And in that comment, ironically, is Bailey, which was like, hey, where was my invite? So her invite is coming. And so I love
I love
this.
their
That-
friendship, man. Mercedes
Yes.
flying all the way from Japan to be there at her debut. That's huge, man. That's
It
love.
is.
That's
It
real
is.
love right there.
And to think that, both both Bailey and Trinity flew, of course, to Wrestle Kingdom for Mercedes debut as well. Like, it's a real friendship, it's real love. And it makes my heart happy to know that the wrestlers aren't siloing each other, even though fans silo themselves and silo the wrestlers. So I think
It
that's
reminds me
great.
that this tribalism that's created for different promotions really doesn't exist in the real world.
It does
Like all
not.
these guys support each other. They're actually real friends, some
Mhm.
family. Like there's no hidden shade because you have to work somewhere else. At the end of the day, it's just
Right.
a job.
And if we consider it that way, like, you don't get upset because your spouse or your family member is working for another company, even if that company is a rival to yours. Like, you're just happy that they're working, you're happy that they're doing well, and you're happy that they're bringing the bag home. So I think that's the win in all of this. And I hope that a lot of us as fans in general will be able to get that to happen. So again, you'll be able to watch this whole thing unfold this Thursday night on Impact. Now, Impact, I got to give it to them. I think under normal circumstances, if this were someone else, they would have kept this a secret. But because, she is one of the most high profile free agents in the business right now, you couldn't keep it secret once the news dropped. So, and then you knew people were going to be taping and filming and all that jazz. So they stuck with it. I think they're going to see some really high ratings coming up this Thursday. But we mentioned free agent, and that makes me think of the WWE draft. Of course, we were very excited about the draft on Friday. We saw things happen both Friday and then on Saturday on SmackDown Lowdown. So we can kind of give you a rundown of where things are as of right now. So SmackDown, of course, the number one draft pick was Roman Reigns. And I say the bloodline because it included Solo, it included Paul Heyman. It did not include the Usos, which is very interesting. Bianca Belair comes over to SmackDown as the Raw Women's Champion. And where Bianca goes, so goes the Street Profits. Edge is on SmackDown, as is Bobby Lashley. The OC returned, which I admittedly had forgotten about them as a unit. So they were back, including AJ Styles. All of Damage Control went to SmackDown, as did the NXT Women's Tag Team Champions, Alba Fire and Isla Dawn. Then going to Raw, Cody Rhodes, the number one draft pick on Friday, along with Becky Lynch. All of Imperium, which includes Gunther, the Intercontinental Champion, Matt Riddle, Drew McIntyre, The Miz, Shinsuke Nakamura, one of my favorite picks heading to Raw, and then the NXT Women's Champion, Indy Hartwell. Another shocker. Now then, there were things that happened on SmackDown Lowdown. These were the additional picks that saw the Viking Raiders, Dexter Lumis, Candice LeRae, the Maximum Male Models. They are all heading to Raw. And then from NXT, we get Zoe Stark, JD McDonough, and Apollo Crews. We also get Natalya and the team of Sonya Deville and Chelsea Green. On SmackDown, we get Hit Row and Lacey Evans. So that's all going to happen. And then there were a few that declared free agency, which included Omos, which I thought was very, very interesting. Von Wagner from NXT, that was interesting. Also, Mustafa Ali, I'm trying to make sure I say that correctly. And Ziggler, Dolph Ziggler. So that's a look at night one of the draft. Man, what are your thoughts coming out of night one?
One, I hope. Well, I did think they would put Bianca on Friday nights, and that means that Rhea might stay on Monday Night Raw with Judgment Day. I hope they don't do the title swap things because I have some reservations about that. And now there are fan speculations that, oh, they're just going to make her swap the titles out so she doesn't break Becky's whatever reign, which is possible. I think the most surprising thing about me was the amount of NXT call-ups.
That surprised you?
Yeah, because I mean, they're almost gutting the brand. You know, Indy Hartwell just became NXT champion at Stand and Deliver, along with Alba Fire and Isla Dawn, and you call them up with the titles. So that means those titles would probably be void here in the next couple of weeks. Then you throw that into like Apollo Crews. He was on Raw and SmackDown before. That makes sense. I thought, if anything, maybe 3 names would have got called up. I thought it would have been Zoe Stark for sure. Possibly Roxanne Perez, and from the men's side, I was thinking maybe Cameron Grimes. I think JD McDonough is a good call up. I think that he probably is long overdue as well. But the amount of names from NXT, when I think about the NXT brand on Tuesday nights and like which storylines automatically are just getting scrapped and we're going to have to start over again, that kind of blew my mind that they took that much talent from the division. Also, a beautiful moment on Saturday when they showed the actual drafting, the real moment of them all congratulating those people who got called up in real time. That was great. That's what you definitely want to see.
To that end, and I'll work backwards. I've always loved NXT. Always had a soft spot. Seeing that genuine moment, the genuine, authentic happiness that they had for anybody who got called up was amazing. And I mean, you could tell, you know, there are some things in this business that you're like, okay, they're staged, et cetera, et cetera. Those drafts don't feel very staged at all. If they can cry on command like that, and they can show authentic happiness like that, that's special. But you can tell it was very authentic and genuine. And so I'm excited for everyone who got called up. Now, I'm not going to say that I was shocked by the amount of call-ups. I am shocked that they're calling up people with championships. That's always weird to me because, you know, we know you're not going to institute those NXT championships on these brands of Raw and SmackDown. So it seems like a foregone conclusion that somebody's going to lose a championship somewhere. But it's interesting, for instance, go ahead.
Well, what if they did? I never thought about it that way. What if they did?
Well, here's the thing. With Triple H, you know, and this is what's so different about these call-ups. The call-ups previously were from Triple H's NXT into Vince McMahon's WWE. Now we're going from the house that Triple H built that he handed off to Shawn into Triple H's house. So there should actually be some degree of continuity, which could make things interesting if the NXT women's tag titles are on SmackDown or if the NXT women's championship is on Raw. Could get interesting. We do know that there is an NXT women's tag title match tomorrow night, which kind of seems to make sense that, you know, Caden Carter and Katana Chance would end up potentially regaining the titles. That would make sense. It is interesting, though, because you do think, okay, well, what are we doing with the women's division in NXT if all of your women's champions are getting called up? Then it makes me ask a question about tonight. Because in my head, you know, Carmelo was off limits. In my head, Wes Lee was off limits. In my head, Gallus was off limits. If all the women's champions got called up, could we legitimately see the men's champions in NXT get called up to Raw or SmackDown?
I think Melo, like you said, I think Melo is completely off limits. I think Braun Breaker might even still be off limits since they're still telling the storyline. But it makes me think, like you mentioned, the tag titles, of course, Indy Hartwell, maybe, because this just makes me think like Shawn Michaels definitely has been recreating his oldest hits. But when Kevin Owens got called up to Raw or was appearing on Raw as a mainstay, he carried around the NXT title.
He did.
So it allowed them to bring more viewership to the brand. I think Indy Hartwell is hurt right now, but maybe it's the same thing for the NXT tag titles. It's like getting them some more exposure, maybe getting a rivalry with the current women's tag team championships, or maybe getting a unification match and still going back to the days where that title floated to all 3 brands. And I think that would be the best move right there.
Yeah, I wouldn't be mad at that at all. That actually makes a lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. Let's see. What did Boza have to say? He said he was stunned that both Bianca and Io were drafted to SmackDown. They're fighting for the Raw Women's Championship. Yeah, they are. They are. And Omos can appear on both shows. Well, that's the thing for any of the free agents. Any of the free agents can appear on both shows, which I just don't know why that level of free agency is given to those four individuals specifically. I don't know. Previously, that had been given to, say, Brock Lesnar, which I understand. I'm not quite sure I understand those four, but we'll see.
For Omos, I get it. It's so he can have consistent exposure as this larger than life athlete, get exposure on those shows, and just call out random guys each week. For Ziggler, since Ziggler is he's the best six man in WWE. You need a rivalry. You need somebody to compete for a title. Ziggler's right there. And since Ali kind of has this this team spirit type of gimmick, I think he's going to be in more backstage segments trying to like rile people up. So I can kind of see it. I think it was kind of random, like you said, to kind of announce it that way, especially because Ali and Dolph Ziggler aren't represented by somebody like MVP.
Right.
But hopefully this leads to better exposure for especially Ali and then Omos.
You know, and to that end, with the draft, I think it would have been an interesting thing if they had announced at the top what free agency was, and that you could, because this idea of declaring yourself as a free agent when night 2 hasn't happened yet seems weird. You usually declare yourself as a free agent if you didn't get picked by anybody. So that makes me wonder what tonight will hold, because it feels like they could upset the apple cart again tonight, which I think would be really, really interesting.
I feel like Cody's going to get drafted to both brands.
You think so?
Like they're going to do the John Cena callback. He's going to get drafted to both, or
interesting
something of that nature.
Well, here's the other thought, which is kind of wild, that I had today, which is, you know, we were talking about, you know, where Seth Rollins would fall into this. And wouldn't it be crazy for Seth to get drafted to SmackDown? And we finally end up with Seth and Roman. You know, the flip side to it is WWE, which I have to give them kudos for. They are keeping couples together on the same brand. And so if Becky is on Raw, then it seems like Seth would be on Raw. I'll also say this. I feel like WWE may have missed an opportunity here, and that is the opportunity to split up the Street Profits. I really thought that Montez would be on one brand and Angelo would be on another, and that'd be the smooth way to get them into their singles careers. So I was pretty surprised that they would end up as a tag team very much still. We'll see where things go. Boza said he was talking about he could tell the genuine shock on Shawn Michaels' face when he found out that the women's champ and the women's tag champs. Yeah, you know, because for Shawn, he's going, you're gutting my group, you know, which, so to me, I like that there's actual shock and awe. You know what I mean? Like, I like that. I think it's really,
and
really,
to piggyback
really
off
cool.
that, that's probably a reason why they didn't counter the draft, because there was some legitimate moments of shock and like, oh, like why is that happening?
Right.
And then like with tonight's roster of individuals, I think there's some layups that we can already see, like, hey, these guys are going to be on Raw. But when I think about surprises, like, I don't know if it's going to be NXT surprise. That would be so wild if you got, like, I can see certain names like that have been on the show for a while, like your Cameron Grimes,
Yes,
or the guys who have kind of spent their time, maybe Dijakovic, Pretty Deadly, who apparently got tossed in the water last week and drowned. I expect him to be drafted tonight.
Yes.
Which is interesting because now that makes me think about some of the names they've trademarked in recent weeks, which I hope they don't do that to Pretty Deadly. One of the big surprises and things that are being floated around Twitter is the return of Big E. So I think we'll get like a full New Day reunion tonight as a draft pick.
Let me tell you something. If Big E shows up tonight,
it's going Imperium versus New Day. So I mean,
I could rock with that.
I think that can be huge if they whatever block of Raw that's on, I'm tuned in. Like they
Yes.
do that tonight. That's huge.
Yes.
That is huge.
Wow. Yeah, I think a Biggie return is going to be emotional. I think it's just going to be emotional, just given all that's happened with him. But I think we have to gear ourselves up for surprises. And one of the reasons why I also think we might get more NXT names is, think about it. Since NXT 2.0, there have not been call-ups from NXT.
You're
There have been people sent down to NXT, but nobody's been brought up to NXT. So I think they're in a space now where they have some folks who are ready. That NXT 2.0 situation will be 2 years old in August. So it's like, okay, there have been people who have really kind of worked through there. And so that also means that there's a bit of a backlog in the Performance Center as well. And if you get to watch Level Up, you'll get to see there are a number of folks on there that we haven't even talked about on NXT yet. So I think this gets really interesting for everything and for everybody.
It makes me think then, because like when I saw that many NXT names, I was like, man, they can't sacrifice anymore. They can't do it. Especially when you talk about like the women's tag team division, because there's not many
Right.
there at all. And you just paired those two together, and now they're your champions. But like you said, Gallus is probably untouchable. They just got their third member back. What if they just surprised us and just like, hey, I think Pretty Deadly, both they was like, hey, the Creeds are coming up too.
The Creeds would surprise me because they're still kind of young in this. That would surprise me. Like, everybody that they've called up from NXT has had some experience. So that one would surprise me. A Braun Breaker one would sort of surprise me experience-wise, but exposure-wise, it wouldn't surprise me. So I think they've left so much mystery and intrigue to this that it's almost must watch. Like, you got, and with it being 3 hours, there's going to be more opportunity, more draft picks, more drama, which I think is interesting. So Ron is saying, oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's why I'm an advocate that NXT should be able to sign some of these free agents per se.
Yeah.
As of Tuesday morning, or at least be able to have access to like one draft pick per round.
I think that would be fair. I totally think that would be fair. Let's see. So Ron says he sees Seth as the inaugural World Heavyweight Champion, which I think would be interesting for sure. Boza says Raw Talk would be even interesting tonight, which they might do some picks on Raw Talk tonight. That makes a lot of sense. Boza says he sees a case where Braun gets drafted and he still does NXT TV for sure. The draft picks go into effect next Monday night, but it's not unheard of that they would finish their time in NXT. Not unheard of at all.
Yeah. And then I'm calling Nakamura. I think it's overdue for Triple H to kind of right the wrong from WrestleMania some years ago. And the presentation they did for his return, I think he's going to Raw so he can kind of be at that level. Like, there's no reason that he shouldn't be.
Give this man his flowers, ladies and gentlemen.
No reason.
Give this man his flowers. I totally believe Shinsuke Nakamura should be the World Heavyweight Champion. I think it's criminal that he has not held a WWE World title since he's been there. He got that massive Royal Rumble win. He got the main event there against AJ Styles, and then we just took everything away from him. I think it's more than time. Bobby, good to see you. Very interesting take on here. How about Grayson Waller getting called up?
You know what?
I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that.
Grayson's one of those guys that just fits wherever he goes.
He does.
Win, lose, or draw, he's the past year alone, he draws attention. Whether it's social media, whether it's the side segments, backstage segments, he just fits. Yeah. So like kind of in that LA Knight mold, he has kind of a cult following as well. When it's like the in-ring work is followed too. I'm not gonna lie. I wasn't a big Grayson guy in the earlier days, but like I believe, and if they called up Grayson, I would not be surprised.
You just mentioned LA Knight. Can you imagine the two of them somehow working together? I
That would
don't
be a
think we
dope
could
one.
handle the promos. It it would be insane. It'd be
I, I,
insane.
I, I'm on the bandwagon. I think Grayson gets to call up
I
before
like
like
that.
a breaker.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's ready, and given he just had that title match last week or so, I think that's those kinds of things are swan song like types of things. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Grayson tonight. Getting the call. I think I
And some
like
guys
that.
don't need the title to like shine on the main roster. We've seen that. We've seen
Totally.
that story many times where people weren't necessarily champions in NXT that end up getting championships on the main roster. I think Grayson's
Q.
one of those people.
I was gonna say Q Becky Lynch, Q Bianca Belair. Like we could go down the list of people who didn't hold a championship in NXT, but have come to the main roster and have really crushed it. Boza says there should be a case where a main roster star should be drafted down. Yeah, you know what? That's interesting. And what I don't know, because I totally agree. I believe that there should be a space for that. I don't know how that will be perceived per se, like if it's perceived like a downgrade or whatever. I don't know, but I think
I
there's a
think the
way
way
to
you
do
can
it.
do that is like we talked about the disdain in Shawn Michaels' face on Friday night. If he's just like, you know what, I hadn't, I'm
Mhm.
selecting X, I'm selecting this
Yeah,
guy or this woman, and everybody's like, oh,
yeah,
like I think you can do it that way.
yeah. I think that'd be fire. Actually, I think that would be fire to do. So, the draft, a big deal. Part 2 again takes place not long from now, about an hour or so from now. So hopefully you guys will be able to check it out. We've got one more massive story that we're going to get to, and I'm debating if we should just go to that and just bypass these history facts, because this one, yeah, I'm gonna make that executive decision. I mean, like the history facts are cool, and there's some really cool things in there to mention. Matter of fact, I'll mention one just to make everybody happy to say that we did it, because this is important. So this day in 2000, Edge and Christian, they used to go to the ring through the crowd, and on this particular day, they stopped doing that. And so they got into the ring, and when they stopped doing that, they said, "Hey, we're not doing this. We're doing something else." And since we didn't do that, we're creating the opportunity for the 5-second pose. So the 5-second pose was created on this day in 2000 by Edge and Christian. Pretty creative stuff. There's a lot of other stuff, but that's the thing you'll want to know and talk about, and it's great. Okay, we did that. Now, this other piece of news has been big. Would you like to set this up, kind sir?
There's there's two big ones, so I'm kind of
Okay.
trying to think of which one you're thinking
Well,
of.
let's do both of them. You pick one, and then whichever one you don't get, I'll grab.
Okay, so I think this is quick. So because
Okay.
I talked about this with you guys Sunday, but it seems like WWE is getting to a space where they want to change some of their, let's call it the legacy of their titles, and add more prestige to the title reigns. It's been reported that WWE has now kind of subtly backdoored a Roman title reign all the way into September. So not just to exceed the 1,000-day mark, but they wanted him to surpass Hulk Hogan's. I think it's 1,400 something odd days holding the title. But
Mhm.
WWE in this effort wants to update its history books and have longer championship reigns for their champions, which it's already receiving some type of backlash. But when you state it like that, I think it makes a lot of sense to make the titles mean something. I think we've
Mhm.
seen this in AEW because there's only a certain handful of champions for their big belts. There's only, I think I count them on one hand. I think WWE wants to get back to that, to where these guys are our stars. This is distinguishable from everybody else on the roster. This is why they're holding these titles this long.
Mhm.
You think that's fair?
I totally think that's fair. I mean, here's the deal, and we've said this about title reigns, and I look at the way the Intercontinental Championship is currently being treated against the TNT Championship in AEW. This is the perfect example. The TNT Championship this year alone has had multiple champions, from Samoa Joe to Wardlow to Hobbs back to Wardlow. I mean, there have been a lot of people who've been, and I think the year started with Darby Allin as champion and Samoa Joe taking the title from him. So, I mean, here it is. We're in the just started day 1 of the 5th month, and we've counted at least 5 different men who've held that title this year. It's hard to deem the championship prestigious if you're not beating somebody that's held it for a minute, and it's hard to call that champion prestigious. One of the facts I was going to bring up today was how this day, I think it was in 1981, when Harley Race regained the NWA World Championship from Tommy Rich. He had lost it to Tommy Rich 4 days earlier. So Tommy Rich wasn't considered a credible champion at that point. It's much different when you beat a champion that's held that title for a year, held it for 2 years. It adds a lot of prestige to it. And so I think making longer championship reigns, what that does is that says, okay, wrestler, if you want to have this spot, you got to show that you can have longevity. We're not just going to give it to the guy who's hot right now, because the guy who's hot now may not be hot long term. And you don't want, it also makes me wonder, and I'm sure it's too late for them to ever do this. It makes me wonder if they regret having certain people hold championships.
Wow.
Like if history wasn't kind to this title reign happening for a day, for 6 months, but the person wasn't somebody that people would remember as a WWE champion. It's interesting, but I like this train of thought, though. I do like this.
It benefits both sides, really, because the guy that knocks off said champion, it elevates them and it makes the moment that much more memorable when it actually happens.
Right. We can cue up the Undertaker streak. The Undertaker streak was perhaps the greatest example of the power of longevity that wasn't connected to a championship. This man had gotten to a point where we were watching WrestleMania sometimes more for the streak than we were for the championship match. That says a lot about what this. So then we all, we hadn't conceived in our mind who should break the streak. But once the streak was broken, we said, wait a minute, who should have broken the streak? Because we understood how valuable that 21-0 was against the Undertaker. So to that end, you're right. Did Brock need the elevating? No. But did it elevate him? It certainly did. I mean, like, he became untouchable at that point. So, yeah, beating Gunther with a championship reign of over 300 days means more than beating the Intercontinental Champion that just won that title 2 weeks ago.
God, if they so we got to get to the next story, but if they let Big E do that, that'll be huge. But I really hope it's Xavier for his first singles title. I
agree.
I hope he's just here for like extra reinforcement versus Imperium.
Yeah. I totally agree. So then we've got just enough time for this last story, and it involves a t-shirt and Britt Baker. So if you guys watched AEW a couple of weeks ago, you saw an angle where Britt Baker ended up getting beaten up by the Outcasts, and it did result in a very real black eye, which she went on to Twitter and posted the black eye. Friday night on Rampage, the Outcasts wore a t-shirt with her image on there of the black eye. I don't think anybody thought anything crazy of it because it seemed like it would be on brand for their story to mock what happened to Britt Baker. However, in comma, the people got upset when that t-shirt actually went up for sale on AEWshop.com, and people began talking about it. People had issues with it. Britt Baker defended it because people were saying that the shirt would promote images and condone domestic violence. Britt Baker, Saraya both said people are being way too sensitive. This did not happen as a result of domestic violence. So why would anybody attribute it to that? So let's ask the question to you in the chat, and said you can speak out on this. Are the people being too sensitive in thinking that this shirt could give off images of domestic violence, Or do they have a very strong point that this is an image that should not be capitalized on by AEW or anyone else?
I see both sides, but I think the uproar of it takes away from more pressing matters like the writing allegations with Vince McMahon that came out a week ago. But like, I think all the outrage of it is just going to make the shirt sell more, which is what AEW wants at the end of the day. It's going to make the shirt sell more. I think if you're wearing that shirt on the street and somebody casual walks up to you, they're probably going to ask you, like, why are you wearing that? There's an AEW logo right underneath the picture. Me personally, I think it's just a t-shirt that is a wrestling shirt. I see how you can attribute it to that, but I think it got overblown to more than what their actual meaning is. And it made me think, because somebody actually pointed out that I think the WWE, I think they profited off the image when Becky Lynch broke her nose between the Survivor Series angle years ago, when Nia Jax broke her nose. And that's not as similar, but it's a more gory image when you really think about it. You have blood streaming down the face, nose broken, and that's a heralded image. So when you compare the two, it's really tough, because I know you don't want to promote the negativity behind it, but also I don't think that was their intent at all with the t-shirt. It's supposed to be a storyline angle. If you watch AEW, you know that. And if you're not a wrestling fan and you ask a wrestling fan, they'd be able to educate you on that as well. But all the outrage over this and all the uproar, the talking points, it's just going to cause the shirt to actually be sold more.
Interesting.
And one thing that I think is very bad is when Fox News starts covering it. Fox News picked up the story, and now they're talking about it and saying this woman's defending herself for blah blah blah. Do you think that's never a good thing when we dip our toe into those waters? So now we're allowing ourselves to have this let's call it a minor conversation, minor inconvenience, be blown up to more than what it was originated for.
So where I sit with it is, I do understand that its origin was not specifically a man hitting a woman. I think one of the differences between that particular image and the Becky Lynch image, and I wish I had that to pull up, is that the Becky Lynch image is her standing in the middle of a crowd, standing, in a victorious pose, which almost looks like her fighting and winning and people cheering her on, which is a much different image than a solo shot of a woman with a black eye. I will say this. I think the issue here is that it's tone deaf from AEW.
Okay.
I think there was intent to create this kind of conversation? No. But it reminds me of what happened during WrestleMania when there was a promo package put together for Dominic, and it involved an image from the Holocaust. And, as soon as awareness of that came out, nobody defended it. They said, oh, snap, we didn't realize we did that. We're sorry. They removed the image. I think this would go away if AEW says, hey, you know what? That was not what we intended. That's not the message we intended to put out. We don't condone, domestic violence or anything like that. Let's pull the shirt. Because one thing AEW is not suffering for is merchandise sales and sales of t-shirt. They're not suffering for that at all. And I don't think anybody necessarily would have had an issue with the women who did it wearing that shirt on Rampage as they did Friday. I think the issue is, what is the message that this is sending to anybody who sees this who did not see that angle? Because there's not other people involved. I mean, if it's an image of the women beating her up, that's a different story. Because it's a combat sport, you expect that. But I just think it was tone deaf. I don't think it was intentional. I think it was tone deaf. And I think that there's got to be an awareness to say, this was not the message we were trying to communicate, but somehow it's the message that was communicated. Let's fix that, because we don't want to be associated.
Well, how do you feel about Britt's basically defending of it pretty much throughout the day on Saturday, defending it and giving you other examples of T-shirts of men and saying like, well, why are you treating me this way, but you treat the men in this light for the similar style images? And also, that I watch a lot of boxing and UFC, so this stuff happens as well.
Sure.
Do we look at it this way because of her ethnicity, having that black eye as well? Is that a thing?
I think what brings about greater awareness is the times that we're in. I think there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I think there is a sensitivity to how women are presented. And we don't ever want to have a scenario where we are glorifying in any way a woman being hit, abused, anything like that, even in the space of a combat sport. Now, we probably should have started discussing this earlier because we're running out of time. So let me do this before we get out of here. Let me make sure you guys are fully aware of the other shows that you can check out. While you're doing that, leave your comments in and we'll continue talking about this. Check this out.
Hey peeps, TK Trinidad here, boss lady of Women's Wrestling Talk. And I want to say thank you so much for watching, because you've got millions of options. Plus, you don't have to worry about sharing your password to check us out. But while you're here, hopefully you know we have so many more shows to watch, like Turnbuckle Glam, Raw Post-Show, WoW Post-Show, AEW Dynamite Post-Show, Women's Wrestling Army Post-Show, NXT Post-Show, Impact Wrestling Post-Show, AEW Rampage and SmackDown Live Post-Show, On the Scroll, ROH Post-Show, WWT Live, plus all of our interviews with the hottest women's wrestlers in the game. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. Check out our website at www.talkpod.com and follow us on all social media platforms at www.talkpod, and make sure to spread the word. That means send this to the group chat. Yes, even the person with the green bubble. Thanks again so much for watching Women's Wrestling Talk, the #1 women's wrestling show on the planet. Ciao for now.
All right. So those are all the other shows, and we've got to go. As you can see, all of those shows, and there's another show that's on the way. But if you want to continue the conversation with us, here's how you can reach us on the socials. That'll be a great way. Said.
So you can find me on Twitter at Said Says, that's CEDD_SAYS. Check out my articles on dailyddt.com. Also on the gram at Said is the answer.
And of course, you can find me at Bonnerfied on all of the socials. You can check out the commentary work on IWTV, on Fight TV, on YouTube, all of the places, all of the things. You can check that out. Of course, make sure you're following TK Trinidad at TK Trinidad. Also follow us here at WWT Live. Always great things happening there at WW Talk Pod on all the socials, www.talkpod.com for great articles and all sorts of wonderful, wonderful things. Thanks to all of you who joined. And again, you kept the chat hot. I'm loving what's happening with your contributions, all of your comments. We can continue the conversations on the socials about Britt Baker and all of the other things. But remember, we'll be back here for WWT Live on Wednesday and on Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. Until then, thank you for joining us here at Women's Wrestling Talk, the #1 women's wrestling show on the planet. Peace.
Women's Wrestling Talk, the #1 women's wrestling show on the planet.